Good evening, this is the Oscar X. We're here with Brother Bro, and it's time to review Nickel Boys. This is an adaptation of Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize winning novel Nickel Boys. The story follows two African-American boys who are sent to an abusive reform school called the Nickel Academy in 1960s Florida. And the story is based on the true events around the Dozier School for Boys. So going into this film, I actually have not read The Nickel Boys, the book, and coming out of it, I'm very compelled not only to read the book, but learn more about the Dozier School. And the reason that's interesting is this film is operating on such a singularly cinematic level, and it prioritizes that immersion and that visual storytelling to the point that you almost want more information. Many films, especially ones with historical importance and weight like this film has, want to teach you in a more didactic fashion about what happened so that the audience leaves being more informed. And I think it does succeed at that, but I think this is more of a companion piece and maybe even like enriches the book side by side rather than is like trying to emulate the book or of trying to play the role of a documentary. And I think that's really valuable. The film gives you a visceral, full-bodied, and completely subjective experience of what going through that system must have been like. And I think what Ramel Ross has done here is one of the great cinematic achievements of the year. Yeah, what this film does is it completely immerses you in a first-person account of the story. Not only a first-person account, but a literal POV of the main two boys. Our main two characters represent different perspectives on the world and how much control they feel that they may have within it. And I feel that those questions that the characters are asking themselves throughout the film were amplified by me being like literally in their place, in the prison that they're in, and wondering how I can navigate this world. The first person perspective constantly had me engaged with the film on a deeper level, and the movie very much speaks almost on a meta level about the power of storytelling and perspective. The movie also incorporates some archival footage like that of MLK's speeches or the films of Sidney Poitier. And that was very powerful because when we see those presented to us, what we're really thinking is what they mean to Elwood. The archival footage is often an extension of the character's point of view. And the film itself also being about the power and the influence that people can have on each other. Maybe the film wishes to do the same thing by being like yet another story that can be told, as it intentionally positions itself as a counter to, say, articles that we might read about the incident. The value of telling a story from a first-person perspective was never lost on me, as the film is such an immersive, powerful, and singular experience. I wasn't sure whether the POV would work for me because I've seen reactions from critics that just seemed like they couldn't get into the film as much as they wanted to or sink their teeth into it. I could see how the film's insistence on employing that technique for the entire runtime could maybe isolate people. We're used to seeing people's faces, we're used to watching actors communicate directly with one another. So maybe there's a stilted quality to the direct-to-camera delivery that I could somewhat empathize with, but for the most part, almost entirely, I was immersed throughout. I had absolutely no problem losing myself in the film and was very much on its wavelength. But I think what makes it work is not that it's shot in POV, it's the way the POV is expressed and explored. Jomo Frey's cinematography is just simply some of the most stunning we're gonna see all year. Because many of the point of view shots are extreme close-up and are isolating little details from the worlds around them, we're able to experience those in a cinematic fashion as the editing coalesces the world into something of an impressionistic portrait. Rather than having this wide-angle point of view that could be seen as objective, the film also splits into two different points of views between the two lead characters. And I thought the way their friendship was explored in point of view gave it this love story and like this romance that would not have otherwise been communicated. And the way that the friendship and the intimacy that the boys shared stays with me is only something that could have been achieved, I think, through this mechanism. The film at its core is about perspective and, in a sense, taking on the perspective of someone else. And I'll just leave it there. But that idea will have even more resonance once you've seen the film. The way that the dual POV kind of becomes recontextualized within the last like 15 minutes of the film was absolutely brilliant. And the way that it integrated into this third-person POV, which is used for our main character in the future. The film's able to weave its narrative and the connection between these two boys into the construction of the film in a way that kind of left my mind blown by the end of it.
I thought the boys were really well cast. Ethan Hierce has very deep eyes. Brandon Wilson I also thought was excellent. Maybe here and there are a bit of clunky line deliveries, and I attribute that to the fact that they're working within a style that is pretty unexplored, like they're not talking to another person, or the narration comes from like behind the camera, probably done in a voiceover.
I didn't feel like that personally.
It didn't bother me too much. Ingenue Ellis-Taylor really blew me away. This is easily one of her best performances. She really has, I think, 4 scenes where she completely owns them. Many of them are monologues delivered directly to camera, and these are some of the most moving scenes in the entire film. It was enough for me to say, I think that should be nominated for an Oscar. It was just a beautiful performance, and every Ingenue Ellis-Taylor performance that I see gets me excited about her.
Yeah, after this and Exhibiting Forgiveness and Origin and everything I've seen her in, I really think that she's one of the best actors working, and just the warmth that she's able to give to this Nana character really resonates. She definitely holds some of the most powerful scenes in the movie. I also want to mention a performance that'll probably be overlooked because it's just one scene, but there's a scene where Elwood's talking to a man who used to be at Nickel, played by Craig Tate, and his performance really stuck with me. It was very haunting, and it added a lot of color to what life after Nickel Academy looks like for these men. I also really liked the score here. I was kind of expecting some light string work, but it goes pretty experimental. Sometimes a bit sound collage-y, and there are some really haunting and beautiful processed ambient vocal samples that are just incredible.
Yeah, really memorable and haunting in the same way that Zone of Interest was for me. The score was deeply unsettling, and there were moments in this film from just the power of the score, sound, and visuals that I was like nearly shaking, because the experience you're having as the boys is absolutely terrifying and traumatizing, but in a way that avoids being sensational. Huge shout out to the score. It's also very versatile, so there are some pieces that are more uplifting. And the sound work here I thought was incredible. The way that ambient noise can take over and become cacophonous. I think the sound is used to maximal effect here, and it is given just as much attention as the visuals. Overall, I think this film is just brilliant. I think Rommel Ross is one of the most fascinating filmmakers working today. I haven't seen a film quite like this, and it's amazing to be alive in a time where we know that films can be made with this level of experimentation and this level of care towards the craft of filmmaking and storytelling. I definitely need to see it again because it's a very dense work of art. Not only are the visuals layered with symbolism and meaning, but the archival footage is something that is kind of left to the audience to connect into the story and to play with. So there's a lot to mine from subsequent watchings here, and also just learning more about the subject before I dive in again. I will say I was a little confused about whether certain things happened, and I had to look them up later because the film's so committed to the point of view style that it doesn't really delve into exposition. But I don't knock the film for that at all. I have no problem just Googling those things and letting the film exist as more of an experience.
I think it's pretty incredible the direction that Rommel Ross went with this story. There have been a lot of stories that have explored tragedies in American history, and for him to contribute to that canon, so to speak, with this experimental approach that adds so much to the conversation and imbues the film with countless layers to peel back. A movie like this reminds me of watching something like Portrait of a Lady on Fire or The Zone of Interest, where the construction of the movie itself is so integral to the meaning that we pull from it. In the Q&A after the film, you could tell that Rommel Ross, who's like a professor of cinema, thinks about images in such a deep way, and archival footage, and like the way that movies sit in the audience's mind. That's why I think his POV filmmaking was so spectacular here, and how it's not, like you said, trying to mimic like, you know, actually what it looks like to see things, but the impression of how things are. This is a brilliant movie. I have no doubt that it will get better on a second viewing, and I would give it a 10 out of 10.
Right now I'm gonna go with a 9 out of 10, but this could go up on a second watch. It is extremely powerful filmmaking, and I was very moved. Now we gotta talk about Oscars. Well, I'm gonna start out by saying, if this film doesn't receive any Oscar nominations, it will be a travesty. If the Academy were to pass up on the opportunity to nominate this for Best Picture and more, I would lose faith. I would lose some faith. But luckily, I do have some faith in the Academy Awards based on the kind of films they've been nominating recently, that they actually might go for this, even though I don't think this will be locked for a Best Picture nomination at other places.
Last year we had a very similar conversation about, can a film that's very experimental get into Best Picture? We were talking about The Zone of Interest.
And that one easily got in the end. The conversations it started, and the way it kind of dominated the conversations around the technical elements. People felt that it was an important film. It was very obvious how it was important. Zone of Interest was steadily in there.
I can understand how some audience members might feel kind of lost in a movie like this, or if they like a more conventional approach to filmmaking, they might miss some of those elements. But the end is such a gut punch in a way that I think will work on almost anybody.
Yeah.
That there's such a powerful moment at the end like that, I think will resonate. And I can see it getting into Best Picture just based on the passion. I mean, a movie can be divisive, but if there's a lot of people in that love it camp, that's what you need to get, the 5% of number one votes or whatever you need to get into the Best Picture top 10.
Even an audience member who's put off by the style is going to walk away knowing that they've seen something significant in its subject and at least being able to connect on a level of story. Maybe some people struggle with how different it is visually and how it's assembled, but I don't know. I just personally don't see that being enough of an obstacle.
A lot of people that I talked to after the film also felt that it was just a knockout. I don't know how that's not enough to get into Best Picture, especially this year, where it doesn't seem like there's going to be a locked-in 10, this film needs its flowers and cinematography. I can see a world where the movie falls off and maybe gets just screenplay or nothing. That'd be really sad. But I think cinematography is easy to imagine as long as it's in Best Picture. I mean, my God, there's no other film that's shot like it this year, and it looks beautiful.
Right now, I'm gonna predict nominations in Best Picture, Best Cinematography, and Best Director. I think the Best Director is going to be a surprise. We're not necessarily going to see it coming because there's a lot of directing contenders this year, and I can easily name 5.
Well, what we imagine is that DGA, Critics' Choice, BAFTA, they all seem less likely to go for this than the Oscars do. And you can say that the Oscars love, their auteurs, and this is his first narrative feature, and it's pretty rare to get nominated off of that, but he leaped into that really hard. This might be a bit far back, but Ben Zeitlin surprised on Oscar nomination morning. I feel like if a movie this ambitious in its style and this experimental gets into Best Picture, it would be weird for it not to come along in Best Director. I do think screenplay is a pretty good shot as well, and adapted does seem to be the less crowded category. Ingenue Ellis, I want her to get nominated.
I really think she might. It depends how much they embrace the film overall. I'm hoping that Precursors will nominate her, but I just don't have as much faith about SAG for some reason. Critics' Choice could be really, really stupid this year.
No, I could see her being left out of places, actually, because the percentage of the film that she's on screen is very small, but I did think that she had enough moments. Maybe she has maybe 10 minutes of screen time in a 2-hour, 20-minute film, so...
I'd be more worried about Nickel Boys if it was a tighter year. It's just not tight enough for me to exclude it from Best Picture. And if this gets Best Picture and it doesn't get Best Director, that's just fucking weird. I would love to see it get score and sound as well. I don't have a feeling that it will. The sound is great in the sense that there's a lot of attention paid to the ambiance, but it's not gunshots, car chases. I mean, that... The Zone of Interest did, paved the way a little bit for something like Nickel Boys to be recognized.
I think the Zone of Interest
that was more extreme.
It was a very extreme use of sound. In the way that this film is an extreme use of cinematography, editing would be very deserved as well. There's a lot of interesting editing choices in the movie. I feel like it won't happen, though.
That does make sense, though. I would definitely consider it in editing.
I don't think, but the editing branch isn't that cool.
Maybe they're just not that cool. Because they'll nominate whatever.
It's not a top 5 film, is the matter of fact of it all.
It reminds me of Beasts of the Southern Wild, where that film did not get in everywhere, and it ended up scoring a nice amount of Oscar nominations.
My prediction is that this may have an underwhelming precursor run. The fact that the Oscars like Terrence Malick more than the other awards bodies and the director's branch too gives me a little bit of hope,
All the films I want to compare this to got nominated for like picture director at Oscar. And I don't see everybody predicting it. I see some people like totally giving up. Some people think it's on the bubble. But look, this is one of the great films this year. Critics will certainly go out of their way to give Ramel Ross directing prizes. I hope.
I think that the wins are a little tough because the movie has even proven a bit divisive among critics, although the reviews are great. That's where I'm like, oh, I don't know if it wins these awards.
Some critics circles I think are gonna go for it.
I damn well hope so. It is Amazon's only contender. That kind of gives me hope that it's like their only thing, and maybe it can even women talking its way in there, and with maybe an underwhelming nomination package or just screenplay, something ridiculous, but still make it in. I mean,
let's try to keep this in the conversation.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Do you have a nickel in your pocket, and does that make you a nickel boy?